Hey guys, welcome to episode number 3 of our Game of Thrones specials. Today on the show, we're going to discuss episode number 2 of season 7. It's getting confusing. Of Game of Thrones. Quick heads up, little technical difficulty on today's show. We recorded the whole thing and didn't have the mixer plugged in, so it's a little quiet. We apologize, but frankly, we had just such a good first take, we didn't want to redo it. We promise better quality next week, but please sit back, crack open a cold one, and enjoy!
Hold on to your butt.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to episode 3 of... This is going to get confusing. Hello and welcome to our third Game of Thrones special. Today we're going to be breaking down episode 2 of season 7 of Game of Thrones. As always, I've kicked the normal crew to the curb. Those losers do not watch Game of Thrones and do not get the honor of being in here. And instead, I swapped them out for a couple of upgrades in Jon and Joe. Woo! There we go. This is definitely, by the way, not our second take of doing this whole thing, because the first time around I was muted.
So much smoother.
So much smoother. So quick pre-warning, as always. We will be diving into full spoiler territory for episode 2 of season 7 of Game of Thrones. So if you haven't watched the episode, pause this, go watch the episode, and come back. Also, quick plug, make sure to listen for episode number 20, big milestone, guys, for the proper Hold On to Your Butts podcast coming up this week. We've got a couple cool things planned. I think it's going to be a VR episode. I've got a buddy coming in to do some VR gaming, and we're going to do some live reacts to it. And also a ton to break down from Comic-Con this past weekend. A lot of big news coming out about Marvel movies, DC, and stuff like that. So make sure to tune in for that. And as always, make sure to reach out to us if you have any suggestions for either show, either the Game of Thrones show or the Hold On to Your Butts proper at Geeks. That's GEEKS at HOTYB.co. Let us know how we're doing. And shout out this week to Eric C. Reaching out a couple of times. Joe, I think this is a buddy of yours.
Yo, brother. Yeah, appreciate the feedback.
Yep.
He's all.
So we're going to be covering a number of the things that he sent us this week on the show. He sent us a couple of mini novels to break down and give us his thoughts, but we always appreciate that. And we encourage you all to do so as well. Again, that's Geeks, that's GEKS at HOTYB.co. So, without any further ado, how was your weekend, guys? This is pretty good. Yeah?
Yeah, I was so jacked for this episode, way more than the season opener. And I felt like more was going to happen, and I think it did. I think it met my expectations.
Yep, I totally agree. John, how was your weekend, man?
It was great.
Looking forward to the episode on Sunday.
I was touring around some of the breweries here, and I kind of lost track of time and didn't quite make it home until about 9:30. But then I popped in as soon as I got home.
Perfect. Yeah, we had a group text going, and you warned us to just stop talking.
Not done yet.
Yeah, you missed that Daenerys is a dude scene.
Yeah, it took me completely by surprise.
So I was traveling this weekend. I was in New York with my wife, visiting her family and stuff, and we were sure that we weren't going to be able to watch this episode until Monday, but then shout out to our friends Shannon and Dante, who let us go over to their place in New York and actually catch the show live. So, yeah. It was a touch and go moment there, but we were able to stay current. So, with that, guys, how did you think episode 2 went?
I loved it. I felt like what we needed was a lot of moving parts, and I think everybody knew it was going to speed up a lot. And I think we got that in this episode, especially with character movement, and we got a massive battle scene. We got characters coming back that we haven't seen in seasons. I think it was a great all-around episode. John, how'd you feel?
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, the first episode was great. It kind of set up. It was like this. It set up the exposition for where we're at now, and I was honestly a little bit surprised with how everything ended up. I think, as I pointed out in that group text, like the game board, so to speak, has changed rather significantly in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
In a way that I was definitely not expecting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, we all kind of felt relatively the same way about episode 1. It was a great setup episode. There had been so much time passed into the last season that we had to get the pieces in place. And I think, to your point, John, we saw the first piece get moved. To make the whole thing an analogy for the painted table that Daenerys has over there at Stormborn. Stormborn? Dragonstone, right. The episode is called Stormborn. Got it. That's why you guys come to us for the expert takes on the Game of Thrones lore. But just how Daenerys is starting to move around the pieces on her painted table, we're actually starting to see the show move in a similar fashion. The first plays in the final sort of push here to the end of the series are starting to take place. And that I almost want to jump to it just right away. If you guys will allow me to sort of jump around this episode a bit. That battle with Euron at the very end. That was the first big, and John, you were alluding to this, the first big moment that the tables have turned, and then now you can almost start to see Cersei getting not the upper hand, but at least a more level playing field.
She got some chips. She can play with some house money, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I feel like as show watchers, we don't know a lot about Euron still. Maybe if you read the book, I think there's a lot more detail, and John can talk about that in a second. Not really a lot more detail. So I feel like he comes into the scene for us, and for me, it was almost like an underwhelming character, especially in season 6, because it's like, who's this guy trying to take over the Iron Islands? Okay, he killed his uncle, who we don't really know that much about in addition. And then it's like Theon and Yara have always been the main characters, so those are the people we kind of like root for and side with, and of course they're with Dany, who seems to be much more likable, but he comes like a bat out of hell with these ships onto the scene and just rains terror. And now you really feel like you know what he's all about.
That scene specifically with Theon and Yara out on the deck of their ship, and there's cannonballs flying over. And at this point, I think maybe we've probably all pieced it together. And you're leaning over and you're whispering, and you're like, "Oh, it's Euron."
Yeah.
And you know it's him, and then they even say it to each other. But then it doesn't even compare to that scene where you see Euron's massive armada coming through that mist, and there's sort of like explosions and lightning going on in this mist as this giant ship just dwarfs the ship that Theon and Yara are on. Yeah, what's it called?
Silence is his ship's name,
That's
and it actually
cool.
You don't get a whole lot of background information about it in the TV show, but if you were paying close attention there at the end of the battle, you would see where they were cutting out the tongues of some downed soldiers, and in the books at least, Euron's ship is completely crewed by people he has allowed to live from his previous raids, but he cuts out their tongues so they can't do any mutiny, they can't communicate with one another, they have to look to him for leadership. I mean, this is kind of like, sure, he's not Ramsay Bolton, he's not, like, maniacal, but, yeah, he's not cutting off dicks.
Just tongues.
But, like, he's a bad dude.
Yeah.
And he's going to do whatever he needs to do to get what he wants.
Yeah, I think we get a pretty strong glimpse of that, especially when he comes down on that crocodile-looking boarding tool.
It's so cool.
Yeah, and he's just like, I'm here, and then you're like, this dude really is insane. And it makes you kind of like him, It's like, oh my god, he's really, like, has all this shit together.
It was a real Jack Sparrow moment for him, you know what I mean? It's like, there's no way he did that the first time perfectly. Like, he had to practice that a few times, you know what I mean? Just falls off, gets back up, and tries it again. But there was, like, there was this part of you that was rooting for him, and it happened to be against Theon, who's got some questionable history, too, and then Elara and the Sand Snakes, who are not exactly fan favorites. It was kind of, Game of Thrones has a tendency to do this, maybe like when the Wildlings breached the wall against the Night Watch, too, specifically. They'll start a battle with two forces that you don't necessarily care too much about. I mean, now, after that Wildlings battle, we've gotten some characters like Tormund that we care a little bit more about, and obviously Jon Snow was there, but at the time, there wasn't a lot of, like, stakes for the viewers, high stakes for the viewers to watch that battle and have, like, a dog to root for, a dog in the fight. I've got my analogies across. But that was sort of what I felt about that battle, too, was, okay, you had essentially Ellaria and the Sand Snakes and Theon and Yara versus Euron and a force that we just know nothing about. And so all we had to root for was movement in the Game of Thrones. All we had to root for was, okay, what's going to be the aftermath of this battle, and how is this going to affect the larger picture? And I think, the outcome that we got is a super interesting one. I mean, you knew the second that the first shot was fired that, okay, this is what's going to happen. Somebody here is going to be the gift for Cersei. And then when he takes Ilaria, you're like, okay, this makes the most sense. This is the person who's responsible for killing the daughter. Marcella, right.
Yeah.
And so, but this is where things get a little trickier, too. So Joe brought up right before the episode a pretty interesting theory that I want you to break down a bit.
Yeah, so after like watching the show completely and then going back and rewatching at least the first half of the episode, at the very beginning, Tyrion makes mention to Ilaria when they're around the painted table and they're kind of drawing out the battle plans. He makes mention that we don't poison little girls. She was innocent, right? Referring to Marcella. We know how you do it. You sand snakes do it to Ilaria. And it kind of feels like this could be a really easy way to create some tension between her and Dany. Like, Dany's trusting her. She doesn't seem to trust a lot of people. Tyrion's been good to her, but he's also made some questionable decisions in the past. So is this something that would really break them up? Because what I could see happening is somehow Euron was headed to Dorne, and Tyrion might have been guilty of relaying back to his family, the Lannisters, where their ships were going and where Ilaria was going, and then them being like, hey, what the hell, did you set this up from the beginning? And so I could see a big rift going there, and that's kind of where we are with all these relationships, right? It's like, okay, who is going to actually stay together for the greater good, and who might break apart and go elsewhere?
And part of me doesn't want, and I think it's probably unlikely that Tyrion is conspiring against Daenerys. But then there is, and I think Eric, our shout out to our lone question and comment submitter, brought up a good point. Like, do we trust Varys? Do we trust Varys right now? And if we don't trust Varys, we know that Varys or Varys? How should I?
Whatever.
You guys cool with it?
Yeah, however you want to say it. I think it's Varys.
Okay, so Varys and Tyrion had been, in league together for a while when they were, journeying towards wherever Marine. And so, might they have the capacity to be hatching this super devious plan in the background that would ultimately seat one of them, or maybe even Cersei on the Iron Throne? I don't know, but would you put it past Game of Thrones?
Yeah. It's funny because, like, Varys is always saying, I'm doing it for the realm. And in this, he even comes back even farther, and he goes so close as to say, yeah, I'm doing it for me because nobody else will look out for me. But he always refers to it as the realm, whereas Littlefinger has never been questioned of that authority, and everybody knows he's doing it for himself. So I think those are the two people that you can never actually truly trust because they'll have their toe somewhere else.
And I think that was, as I was watching that, and then, again, so one of our roommates is working through the series for the first time.
We gotta get that person on.
Yeah, I'm sure she'd be down for it, actually. Awesome. But and I realized it. We just wrapped up season 1 the beginning of the weekend, and it was then that I realized that everything that has happened has been because Varys or Littlefinger has had their hand in it. Like, these two guys are, I think they might be the kind of the puppet masters here.
They're playing the Game of Thrones.
They are playing the Game of Thrones, but to what end is, I don't know. I think Varys is very genuine when he's talking about doing it for the realm. Because he's never had anything other than where he's at. This is, I think he does care about the common man. Littlefinger, on the other hand, not so much. Littlefinger's out for himself. And I think that's where we're at right now. But it's cool to see them now all of a sudden back on the same continent. Like, their conflict is coming to a head. The thing they started 7 years ago is coming to a head.
You bring up a good point about Littlefinger. I think we talked about maybe on the first episode, our pre-show, about how we have had that moment with Littlefinger where he sort of showed remorse, or it was when he, married Sansa off to Ramsay, and he showed that genuine, or at least seemingly genuine, apology to say, I had no idea that he was going to be like that. I think we got that moment with Varys on this episode, where it's like, so many people have had questions about these people's intentions, and are they the ones that are the puppet masters and pulling the strings? But I agree with John. I think we really saw this moment of Varys saying, "These are my intentions," and Daenerys asked for blind allegiance, and Varys said no.
It was something about incompetence and blind